What's up, everybody? We're back. Welcome to OT Exposed Raw, live, uncut, and unapologetic. We're kind of like the rice crackers of news podcasts. Like, we're pretty much just filler. We have absolutely no taste, but yet somehow we claim to be good for you. So, all right, this is episode 2. It is no doubt going to be better than episode 1. You know why? Because everything is better than episode 1. That was a Star Wars joke. All right, I'm Clint Bodungeon. I'm your host. And by the way, if you just can't get enough of me and this beautiful face, and I know that there is a silent minority out there looking at you, Scott McNeil. You can catch me tomorrow at 3 o'clock Central Time. I'll be on the Haunted Hacker podcast with Mike Jones. Who, you might ask? Mike Jones. Yeah, I went there too. Sorry, Mike. I had to do it. I know you've never heard that joke before, but I had to do it. So without further ado, let's welcome our co-host today. It's the same as last week, but the man who thinks he's Dutch or claims he's Dutch, and I don't know, I can't understand a single thing he says, so I just go with it. But let's welcome from backstage, because he's eating cookies in the green room or something, Pascal Ackerman.
Hey there. So I'm from
Hey there.
Holland.
Wait, are you from Wisconsin? Or are you from?
What
are
is
you
your
from
excuse?
Nobody can understand a thing I say half the time anyway.
You understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Ain't nobody understand the words that coming out your mouth.
We had to go there. Hey, I'm glad to be back between all the breaches and the solar flares of the last week. It's a miracle we still have internet. So.
Yep. So we have to talk about it. I'm getting sick and tired of talking about Colonial and thinking about Colonial. I'm kind of empathizing with the British here, but we're gonna have to talk about one thing. But before, we got a special guest this week, and like I said, we're gonna start bringing guests on the show. And today, our first guest, our special guest, everybody, please welcome from Blumira. He's a co-founder and CTO of Blumira. Everybody, welcome Matt Warner.
Hi, great to be here. Excited to be here.
Welcome, Matt.
That didn't sound very exciting.
Sorry. Sorry. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, all right. Yeah, I don't know. What do we expect from a man with it looks like you have a guillotine in the back room. So back there.
Well,
so.
yeah.
I saw him use it on a different podcast. It's very efficient on kids that won't listen.
It's true.
Oh, well.
I have one in this house and it's required.
Headless now. By the way, Matt, so the cool name Blumira, you're a co-founder. What's up with the name Blumira? I like it. I like the name, but it kind of sounds like something that Jeff Foxworthy would put in his redneck dictionary. It's kind of like, Ethel, go get the mirror. No, not the green one. Get the Blumira. And so tell me about the name Blumira.
Sure. Yeah. I wish I could say there was a story that didn't involve a bunch of tired people trying to come up with a company name that didn't have a .com available. But in many ways, it is largely looking at blue teaming, detecting threats, looking for stuff, and mira, which is Spanish for look. So it's largely about blue teams looking for threats inside of environments. Really just on the nose there.
It's kind of an anticlimax.
I know.
It really was.
I know. I need a better
nice
story.
name. It's a nice name, but yeah.
Yeah, I like the guillotine better.
I know. You're right.
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to make a request. You change your name to Guillotine.
It would definitely have a different energy to it. You're very correct about that.
If you don't use our products, we're going to use this on you. So
exactly. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a head joke in there somewhere too. But so anyway, let's. All right, done with that one. All right. Like I said before, we've talked enough about Colonial, but we've got one thing here. This is technically really not about Colonial per se. I mean, there's still more meat on the bone. That horse is still hunting. That that beat that poor dog to death. But this was pretty interesting last week, where we had there was a report, and there's been several different news agencies that kind of reported on this a little bit, but it's about the ransomware hackers had a secret weapon. It's self-promoting. And by the way, I can't bring up links this time. Literally right before we went live, I broke the whole screen sharing thing, and I can't bring up links. But I promise you, I will put links in the description of the showcast. Same thing with the Haunted Hacker broadcast. I'll put the link in the description, and I just literally broke it. So anyway, I'm not good with technology. So anyway,
let that sink in for a minute.
Yeah, let that sink in. Yep. So anyway, we had so the ransomware hackers had a secret weapon. Self-promoting cybersecurity firms. So you guys, Pascal, why don't you take it there and tell us kind of what happened?
So basically, the malware that DarkSide used to do the attacks was uploaded or was analyzed by Bitdefender, and they promoted, or they found a flaw in the way they did their encryption. So it basically came down in reusing encryption keys between their customers or their victims, right? And they discovered that, and they pronounced that to the world, said, well, we got a free tool for you, you can recover from that. And then basically DarkSide came back and they said, thank you for finding that. We're going to change our strategy, and now we're going to come back extra hard with better tools. And therefore they were very appreciative of what Bitdefender did for them. Yeah,
their exact quote was, special thanks to Bitdefender for helping us fix our issues. This will make us even better.
Yep.
I was
going to point out there was actually two other security folks, Fabian Wozar and Michael Gillespie.
Yeah.
They had found the same flaw in the code, but they didn't actually publicly announce that. So
yeah, they were being discreet about it, right? They were being discreet about it. You got any comments on that there, Matt?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. And when I saw this, our first conversation point was, we wonder what the pipeline is for bug bounties for ransomware as a service. Because I mean, the amount of value, the amount of revenue that DarkSide brought in over that year that they were functioning was ridiculous. I mean, it was an insane amount of money they were able to bring in. And compare that with the value of solving a bug bounty for them like that. I mean, there's got to be a pipeline there for ransomware as a service payouts on bug bounties. It's definitely one of those situations for me as a more of a developer security focused person of, there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be problems in code. And in those situations where you are allowing and exposing those vulnerabilities to groups that really do not need the help in those situations, it's not something that I particularly love. It kind of feels the same as when organizations will drop a POC really early in an exploit cycle, and it's kind of like, sorry, we just wanted to push it out there, and it just doesn't help the community, and it really kind of pushes everyone back further, which is never my favorite thing. I always go with responsible disclosure wherever possible, and if not, mitigation first.
Yeah, and Bitdefender was quote unquote, literally quote unquote, they were happy to announce that they had discovered this, right? They were happy to announce they're going to screw everybody. So that's nice. Thank you.
I don't think that was their intent. They were just happy that they were going to be, probably in the news, and they were going to help people who got infected with this ransomware.
And it was a little bit, I mean, let's face it, it's a little bit self-serving, right? I mean, they're going to choose the publicity over discretionary benefit.
Yeah,
there's actually I wouldn't say a requirement, but there's actually an unspoken rule in the security community. You don't upload these kind of executables, and especially now when you're with a customer engagement, to like a VirusTotal or any of these public sandboxes, because the bad guys are sitting and watching that too, and if they see that you're uploading it, they know they've been compromised, and they might take actions to mitigate.
Yeah, I mean, we saw this actually just yesterday. We saw a fish coming across. I searched for it. We searched for it inside of VirusTotal and identified 10 or 15 other large companies that had also been attacked just because they had dropped it into VirusTotal, and their emails are base64 encoded, and you could go through it and find every other company that had been also hit with that fish. So it's something you really got to avoid. I mean, it's really tempting. I get why it's tempting to want to just kind of drop it into VirusTotal or Hybrid Analysis or Bitdefender or any of them. But the amount of exposure that you add is slightly terrifying in a few different ways. And it also enables this kind of situation where it's really better suited to researchers handling this in a more structured way, if at all possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of Haunted Hacker, the podcast will be on tomorrow. He's in the house, and he mentioned this is a good comment though. DarkSide is also they not only attack with ransomware, but 16 gigabit a second DDoS, and that's not something that I know anything about. But I think that was a good comment that they're not just.
I think it's a really big number, 16 gigabits. I wish my internet connection was that fast.
Yeah. So what that reminds me of that. Who you guys remember Jester? He was kind of a vigilante hacker.
Yeah, the hacker.
The Jester, and he used to have this. I think it was called Xerxes. He had this tool called Xerxes, and he used to knock down websites from, I guess, terrorists, and say whenever he knocked one down, he said "Tango down." But that's what it reminds me of. That's the kind of that's the type of like gigabit prowess I think you would have to have. I don't know what he was using to do that, but he was pretty successful at it. He kind of went away for a little while. Anyway, I digress. I hear somebody's kids in the background. Is that you? Oh,
I gave him money for ice cream and they left hours ago.
It's Pascal. Pascal is already Pascal has already learned that the kids are not allowed to be in the room whenever he's on a call with me because they learn extracurricular words. All right, so
or they teach us some.
Yeah. So moving right along, another, I guess, kind of side effect of a very visible incident through Colonial. And by the way, this is going to end up getting to the point to where I think Colonial is going to end up like the forbidden S word, and you're going to have to drink every time you say it. 3, 4, 5 years from now, everybody's going to have to drink when they say the word Colonial in reference to this incident, just like the esta word. Which, by the way, it is a Friday. I think so. I think it's going to get there, and it is a Friday, so everybody should be cracking over a beer, a tea, a coffee, or a beverage of your choice, or a small animal. But just let's so DHS, specifically TSA, announced that they're going to impose regulations, and so basically they're starting with a few regulations, and they're going to be moving into, I guess they say more restrictive or more robust. They say more robust regulations, and they're starting off with two major ones. Number one, they're going to require pipeline operators to report cyber incidents to federal authorities. And then number two, they're going to require them to have actually there's three, and they're going to require them to have a cyber official such as a CISO 24/7. And then the third is they're also going to require companies to assess their security. And in one instance that I read, they specifically said like a gap analysis. And then they have to report they're going to have to report the findings to federal officials, they say, or federal authorities. So I'm going to pause there and let you guys comment on that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're loving seeing in regard to pushing forward and getting more proper regulations from the top that are, at least for me, it's something that has been missing a lot. I know that I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about where the Biden executive order has gone, but it is nice to see. Yeah, it is nice to see the TSA push harder and saying let's identify gaps, especially with Colonial, because I think a lot of us just, especially in this defensive security, offensive security side, just kind of popped Colonial into like Census or Shodan, and anyone immediately found how Colonial got popped at that point. It was not a difficult thing to identify as to why. So pushing forward and getting people to at least look at their attack surface and identify where they are and where they're going, I think is the best starting point for a lot of these organizations by far.
Yeah, and I'm going to say amen on that, because even if we implement something now that's not perfect right off the bat, it's still better than doing nothing, right? There's going to be There's going to be millions of conversations. There's going to be arguments whether we're doing the right thing, whether the administration is doing enough or not, or too much. But at the end of the day, it's still better than just sitting there and waiting for the next one to be popped.
Well, if you think about it, this kind of rides on the heels of NERC SIP, right? Everybody for a couple of decades now has been wondering, like, look, so the electric utility sector for nuclear has been regulated forever. You have the electric utility sector that's been regulated for quite some time now with NERC SIP. So everybody's been kind of wondering when it comes to pipelines or other critical industries, where is this? When's it coming? When's it coming? And so on one hand, me personally, I'm the type of less government, less regulation type of person. But I think at some point, and I'm not. I am. I was going to say I'm not going to blame operators, but in certain circumstances, I am blaming a lot of operators because it's only a matter of time before you sit around and do nothing and you play the denial game. This is how you get regulations. You want regulations? This is how you get regulations. And so ultimately, I think it's a good and a bad thing, right? Because one of the things, like, this is all coming off of also the TSA pipeline security guidelines as well as API 1164 and that's where it's going to come from, right? Which those of course reference other standards. And so and when you come down to it, for the longest time, regulators, the regulations they're vague and a little bit nebulous on purpose because the regulatory authorities, they don't want to pigeonhole you or pipe stove you into what you exactly have to do. They're not going to be prescriptive. So they made it voluntary. They gave you basic guidelines. But when those aren't going to be followed, or you're going to have incidents. So maybe it's overkill. Maybe it's time for it. I'm not going to judge. But I do know that I think it will probably help. I think after this, it's probably a matter of time before we get it in water and then manufacturing and everything like that. So comments there?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And if organizations, it doesn't matter if it's vertical based, like we're seeing here with pipeline operators, you have to move forward. And if you're not going to move forward, someone's going to force you to move forward at one point or another. We continue to see this culmination of failure of security across different organizations, different verticals, different groups. And at the very least, in the case of utilities, they can be regulated. Someone can at least push them forward, which is great to see, to be quite honest, because a lot of organizations will just not do it. It just won't happen. They didn't need, I'm not going to say the name, they didn't need to expose unpatched exchange for 3.5 months. They didn't have to do that. They just happened to do it because they didn't put in the effort to patch, they didn't put in the effort to scan, they didn't put in the effort to detect. And because of that culmination of failure in IT maturity and IT processes, everyone is going to have to get impacted by that, because if they aren't doing it, we all know that many people also aren't doing it. And we've seen that not happen in all those organizations as well. So it's one of those just inevitable, like, this is the future of the world. We have to try. And if no one's going to try, then we're going to make you try.
Yeah. And there's one thing I want to say that in last week's broadcast, kind of a good segue here, but last week's broadcast, we talked a little bit about, why the C word decided to shut down and why they didn't and all this stuff like that. And I was speaking from just general industry experience with the customers that I had. And then I listened to the podcast. It was the Dale Peterson's Unsolicited podcast where he had Joe Langell on. And I was blown away with, there's so much that, I thought that I knew and I didn't. And Joe Langell, you should listen to that podcast, because before you listen to any speculation about what happened with Colonial, yes, you guys drink. The bottom line is that, I was amazed at how much information Joel has in pipeline operations in general. I learned so much just by listening to him just about general pipelines, and he doesn't even have boots on the ground, firsthand knowledge of what happened at Colonial. Shut up, Pascal. I know that's a sore spot there. But anyway, inside jokes are still flying around here.
Yeah.
But what he knows about pipeline operations and the regulations, that's the reason I brought this up, because he knows so much about the regulations when it comes to oil and gas and pipeline and the processes. So definitely, that's definitely a true source of knowledge when it comes to pipelines and all this stuff happening. So like I would listen to Joel first and foremost before any news. So I just want to throw that out there. And I wanted to correct, things that I said, which I'm not going to. I want to, but I'm not going to. All right.
I'm pretty sure we said the right thing is that it's easy to stand on the sideline afterwards and make judgment, right? Which a little bit of we did, but yeah, afterwards, hindsight is 2020. You can throw it what you want, but if you step back and you look at it, then a lot of these things start making sense.
Yeah, well, and also the only thing what I'm specifically talking about, what I got wrong was talking about how I don't think that they would have shut down. Even if that hit the billing system and the scheduling system, I said, look, I think it was part of the decision, but I think it was mainly for safety. And Joel had a really good discussion on why affecting the billing system and the scheduling system, but even specifically the billing system on the enterprise network, on why they would actually shut down, even if it had nothing to do with safety. It was really good. Just go listen to that podcast. It's Dale Peterson's podcast, Unsolicited Podcast, and it's with Joe Langill, and it was amazing. It was a great discussion, and I recommend everybody go listen to that if you're at all interested in the colonial stuff. And I'm going to get somebody drunk here. I continue to say that. I know. But, all right, so that brings up an interesting point in a segue here. And I think that there's an interesting contrast between, and I'm going to ruffle some feathers here. And there's an interesting contrast between the TSA regulations, or how they're going to make the TSA regulations, I guess, mandatory, and what happened with the president's 100-day initiative. And so if you look at the 100-day initiative, it was mostly focused on threat monitoring, situational awareness, and visibility. Real-time visibility is in the language. Whereas the TSA initiatives, or I guess the TSA regulations, are focusing on, I have it here. So also about the 100-day initiative, it's more about encouraging and voluntary, whereas TSA is going to be explicit and mandatory. And so the TSA guidelines, or they were pipeline guidelines, are going to be regulation now, focus on mitigation, assessment, and reporting. So they are focusing a little more on that assessment and the gap analysis and everything like that, and kind of what we call the basic blocking and tackling first, whereas Biden's 100-day initiative, I guess I should be nice and say President Biden's 100-day initiative, we're all buddies, goes into mostly threat monitoring, situational awareness, and real-time stuff. So, let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm sure we all have something to say.
Oh, yes, we do. So if you think about it, it's almost like you're listening to Rob Lee and Dale Peterson talk about security, right? It sounds like TSA has been talking to Dale Peterson. And then you got President Biden has been talking to Rob Lee, because those are the visions. Those are the distinct visions these guys have.
Well, and if you really get down to it, let's face it, for better or for worse, I think Rob Lee is an excellent what's he called? I almost said adversary. You're not an adversary. Sorry, dude. He's a representative, or I can't think of the word. I need to drink. Anyway, I think ambassador. That's what I was trying to. I think he's an excellent ambassador in OT for us in Congress and government. But threat intelligence and monitoring, it is really important to him, and so he believes that is something that you should kind of have. And by the way, and here's something I actually, again, listening to his podcast with Dale, I have been one of those people that's like, oh, okay, threat monitoring companies, they're just going to put threat monitoring technology out there first. They're just going to say, oh, you need threat monitoring first. And listening to Rob Lee talk on the podcast, I was pleasantly surprised. His stance was very reasonable and logical, and he's not one of those people that says, oh, threat monitoring first. I think really that's just something that is very important to him, and I think that's kind of what was put out there in Congress. That's what Congress heard. But both Dale and Rob are very much about the blocking and tackling, do the basics first and everything like that. So I want to make sure that we get that straight. But where do you guys stand on the whole, like, what should you focus on first and all that good, who's on second and all that good stuff?
I keep reverting back to this. My stance is you get your affairs in order. You make sure that you have a proper segmentation, IT versus OT, industrial versus enterprise, and then from that point on, that's where a lot of folks tend to not agree. My second step would be monitoring. So there's a lot of people say, well, once you got to separate it, you got to start thinking about patching and vulnerability scanning and risk mitigation. I've been to a lot of customers who do not have the resources or the time to do proper patching on the OT side. So the next step after you do proper architecture, in my opinion, should be monitoring. So you know if something goes wrong, and even if you had the resources to patch and to do all of those things around the clock, there's always going to be something new. There's always something that might sneak by. There's always somebody who can bring in an infected USB or click on the wrong link in an email. So having eyes on the ball is going to be very valuable. I'm sure Matt agrees with that.
Yeah, I mean, monitoring is near and dear to my heart. Log ingestion and log collection is, of course, really important to me. And I kind of come at this a slightly different way, but I definitely generally agree with Pascal there in that realistically, we're all looking for defense in depth. We're all looking for every layer that we can get to detect where something bad is happening. If someone brings a infected USB in, we want to be able to see that in the enterprise network. We want to see if it's going to try to traverse into the OT network. And in the case of even situations where there isn't proper segmentation in place, if you have visibility, at the very least, you know how to build out that segmentation and you can see the segmentation grow inside of that environment. However, I also say that also knowing if you don't have good formal blocking and tackling in place, if you haven't started to build some maturity in your IT processes, it doesn't matter what you do for monitoring. It will never matter until you start to build out those processes and you can actually respond to what's coming across the wire. Because realistically, monitoring is going to go one or two ways for you, or let's say three ways. It's going to be really quiet because you haven't really set it up fully, maybe 4 ways. Really, you could probably go like 12 ways. But I'm gonna try to keep it as small as possible. Really quiet because it isn't set up very well. Incredibly loud because you aren't really sure what to look at. Or somewhere in the middle that may or may not be useful, and that's where you get this big spectrum of like usability versus not usable. And realistically, you need such significant security talent to land in the middle in a really good way that to ensure that an organization is moving in the right direction, I kind of look at monitoring and visibility with blocking and tackling is one of those. They need to happen side by side, not only because monitoring will inform where you can move in regard to the kind of formal IT processes, but it will let you also build out that segmentation in a way that you can get visibility into it. I do think there's a lot that needs to happen from a response perspective, making sure that you can do a lot of those things. But if you can get a monitoring tool or a threat detection tool, it doesn't, I mean, realistically, there are two different things. But if you can get a tool in place that will help you gain visibility, help you identify risks in your environment and move forward at scale, I think that's one of those situations where you can get a lot of payout for it. But the hard part is getting the right tool, getting the right information there, being able to identify the right things, and being able to have your team facilitate that information in the best way possible. Because if you don't have that, it's never going to matter. It doesn't matter if you get they who will not be named. It doesn't matter if you get an alert that says you have a web shell on your Exchange server if no one is there to respond to it. So you have to have everything kind of lined up. You have to have things set up in a way where if something happens, you can move forward with that process. Because if you don't, and you aren't with a tool or you aren't with a service that's going to be like, hey, what are you doing? This is getting really bad. And they still may not move forward in that case. Then you just get owned and then you have proof you got owned, which I guess is something. That's what happened with Target. But it's better if you can know when something is happening and follow that defense in depth and have that IT maturity start to get built in an organization. And all that requires that high level buy-in of like, we want to do this. This is important. This is why this will be good for the organization. So I think the biggest issue with the Biden executive order was really that it doesn't force anything. It's all this like voluntary industry effort. We're going to move forward. We're going to try really hard this time, guys. And we all know
Go team.
Yeah, go team. I wrote this. There's this 50-page executive order. It's going to be great. Now we're going to add more to it. But realistically, as all of us know, all that really means is that someone in that company who's a compliance officer, it has their head in their hands, and they're like, "Oh my God, another regulation. It's a voluntary one. We don't need to do this one." And there needs to be this kind of push forward around, and this is a topic that is really important to me, of IT maturity. It doesn't matter if you know everything. It just matters that you're trying to move forward and do a little better. And that seems like a really high bar, but it's just like, just start trying and let's just move forward. So yeah, I put monitoring and blocking and tackling kind of even.
Well put. I think that's well said. I think we should start giving out participation trophies for operators. But maybe that's what it is. But I'm going to come at this from a bit of a different perspective. So first of all, one of the things that I definitely agree with is that this whole layer defense thing, right? Everybody wants layer defense, but nobody can afford all those damn layers or has time to put them all in. I mean, and that's the bottom line, is that layered defense, and you can't say defense in depth or Industrial Defender will come after you, because I think they copyrighted defense in depth a long time ago. Yeah, a long time ago. Like when I used to work for them. But but I think defense in depth, or I'm gonna get sued. But layered defense is a great concept. But I mean, it's too resource intensive to like really try to do all of that. Kind of like best practices, right? It's a big safety net. Nobody can achieve all of the best practices and all the layered defense. And so, so that's kind of where I am on that. And you really have to pick and choose your battles. How do you pick and choose your battles? How do you prioritize? Well, that's all about that goes into your risk analysis process, right? And identifying the impacts and everything and prioritizing. But that's a different discussion. So that's a webinar. This isn't a webinar. But ultimately, where I kind of stand, I agree with you, Matt. I mean, I do put it's cart before the horse, chicken before the egg kind of thing, or chicken before the cart, because in my opinion, it really depends on your situation, right? For one operator, it might be better to do monitoring first in some circumstances, and for others, it may be better to do blocking and tackling, network segmentation, right? I mean, because it's real easy, and I've said this before too, and I'm making fun of myself here. I've said that threat monitoring to me, or putting in threat monitoring first, is like putting an alarm system on a half-framed house, right? It's like you got no doors, no windows, and no walls, but we'll know we're there. We'll know we're getting robbed blind. No pun intended. But ultimately, one good thing about threat monitoring, if you do that first, one amongst many, is if you are owned, and if you, because I also would say things like, if you're already owned, it's too late. But if you start the threat monitoring process, or at least the threat hunting, or the information gathering, you do at least get more information that's going to help your incident response. So if nothing else, even if you are already owned, right, that information is going to enhance your incident response capabilities. So that's one thing. And also,
hold on. I want to quickly, while I remember it, with the analogy about the house, there's an interesting trend I've been seeing in a lot of these low budget companies that have just enough to do the minimum. They will start with monitoring, and they will tackle whatever they find during the process. So let's say you built a frame for your house. Now you're putting an alarm system on there, and you notice that somebody's coming through what should be the front door. The alarm system is going to say, hey, the front door would have blocked it. Now we get a funding. We get $50. Go get a front door.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a great point. Yeah, right? Because that's one thing. Yeah, monitoring, it is a good early warning system as well, right? An early warning system is better than no warning system, and especially because because if you're putting in all these controls and you're doing all the best practices, whatever, if you don't have any threat monitoring whatsoever, then you may be getting owned while you're putting this stuff in and spending all of your money and budget on preventive controls, and now they're already inside, right? You've trapped the fox in the hen house. So I'm not as polarized on this as I used to be, because it really depends on circumstance and what your security already looks like in your organization. So it really, I mean, I hate to say it, but I really am starting to get swayed a little bit. I mean, put a damn firewall in first, at least. Maybe do some. I mean, two-factor.
Yeah,
the firewall is going to give you insight, right? It's going to give you logs and events.
Yeah. So at very minimum, logging, right? Even if you can't do full-on threat monitoring, situation awareness, at least do logging and at least start capturing that, right? So I guess my preference would be start with the bare basics first. So start with make sure you're at least got a firewall if you can't segment. You need to do some two-factor authentication, basic user awareness training, or some better user awareness training, because most of the attacks are going to come in right through the user. And so, focus on a better user awareness training program, focus on two-factor authentication and things to make it to where basic phishing attacks won't work. Get your basic security controls in place. Turn on your logging. Start your logging. Then you can start to make decisions on, okay, now do we need full-on threat monitoring? Do we need to go further with basic blocking and tackling? So it's all situational and it's all circumstantial. So,
it's going to take a lot of years to get there. Sorry for interrupting you. But
no, you're fine.
I made the decision to start securing my stuff a week later. Why is it not secure yet? No, that's not the way it's going to work. And that's where probably the layer defense comes in. You add on layers that most fit your
like an onion.
Yeah, exactly. Like Shrek. It's all
like
Shrek
an ogre.
superior. Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I think the house example is a great one, and I do. Part of the reason that I like monitoring early in the process is because it allows you to, when you're in those situations and you're building the house, you're building segmentation. I think all of us have been in that situation where it happens probably more on my side than your side, because OT, you really need to segment. And I see organizations that just have never tried. And the moment you come to them and you're like, hey, you need to segment, the amount of effort that goes into segmentation, if you've never done it before, is this huge ask of a lot of people. And they should do it. I mean, there's no reason they shouldn't do it, but it's just such a big ask for IT. And really what I look at, and we see this often, is not only does monitoring give you the ability to see what's happening and where you're going, but it also lets you see when things change inappropriately during those efforts, which happens constantly, especially when you're changing your firewalls, you're changing your ACLs, you're changing how things work. It's really easy to accidentally drop like a default deny or drop something that's supposed to be coming to your DMZ, and all of a sudden you start getting hit with RDP traffic that's going in. You start getting hit with stuff that could potentially result in either ransomware or some other sort of exploitation in your environment. You really got to target that really heavily. And while you're building that house, those are the times when all of those are going to fall off. You're going to get into those oddities, because no IT professionals is perfect. None of them are. It's just the reality of the world. None of us can be perfect. So it allows you to kind of get ahead of that and then solve those problems as you move forward. And they don't become systemic problems then. They're just problems that you need to work on as you move forward. And then, I mean, it's really kind of the biggest benefit of it all. If you do get a firewall, please don't get a Cisco ASA. That's just going to be my ask that I'm just going to throw out there just for everyone. Sorry,
Lord,
Cisco.
That's going to be your ass. Earlier, I swear earlier I was like, I thought you said that's a really big ass, and I'm like, oh, ask. It's like, man, this COVID 150 is really starting to show.
He's only saying it because Fortinet firewalls are really cheap at the moment.
That's true. They're always cheap. Those things.
Oh yeah, you know what? Hey,
that's a
message. Let's segue. Let's go there. Let's skip right over the vCenter hole and let's go right into the Fortinet stuff since you brought it up. Yeah. So what? It's kind of a little more recent. I haven't had a chance to read up on anything like that. So what is going on with Fortinet?
I think last week we talked about Fortinet as well, and it gave attackers a way into industrial environment. I think it was the VPN at that point. Oh, it's the VPN this week again. But they discovered that not only are industrial companies targeted, it's like a municipal in, does it even say where in the US it is? But anyway, Fortinet has a vulnerability, remote code. It's like a CVE up there, 9 point something. And just basically it allows you to get right in.
I'll put the links for this. We have all the CVEs here for the Fortinet, right? It's It's 3 bugs. It's CVE 2018 13379. That's almost leet. That is leet. It's like leet 9 2018 13379.
Too.
Yeah, and it's so CVE 2020 12812. And anyway, and y'all don't want to hear this. I'm gonna put the links in the description later because I broke my ability to screen share. Did I tell you that yet?
The main reason I put this article in there is because I'm always interested in how does a company like Blumira take this and then go from here to detection. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways, and Fortinet is actually a particularly interesting one. This is a pattern that we've identified recently. I don't know how much people are fully aware of this, but Fortinet and Checkpoint, I'm pretty sure, works the same way in this regard. I know the Cisco Firepower Defense also works this way, where the VPN negotiation is actually in a different plane than the IPS. So when you block IPs or your IPS is in the way, it will not negotiate that connection for the VPN first. The VPN goes directly in no matter what. So just FYI, for those of you with Fortinet, if you're trying to block IPs that are doing this, it does nothing, which is something that we've definitely learned as we go about it. So the way that we look for attacks like this, the way that we look for these kind of behaviors tends to be associated with 2 different kind of behavior or behavioral patterns at the very least. One is inbound, and it has to do with unknown or new connections being negotiated at the VPN level. That could be associated with an IP that is known bad. And in the case of this exact vulnerability, we've identified it a number of times starting negotiation processes with Fortinet. So the way that that'll generally work as a known bad IP, almost always Cobalt Strike, because let's be honest, that's the main bad Cobalt Strike these days. And they're known IPs because they're not that hard to know. They're attacking everywhere. But the moment that these vulnerabilities grew larger and they became more public, especially with getting added to exploit kits, we immediately start seeing an increase in IPs going out from these Fortinet devices. Because of the way the Fortinet works and because it allows the negotiation to start no matter what, no matter if this exploit is successful or not, it allows that immediate negotiation out to these IPs. So we detect it one way through looking through negotiation out from devices to those IPs, and also just scanning connections from these IPs. So that is essentially looking for when a single IP is making a surprising pattern across a single VPN inside of a Fortinet. And usually that allows you to quickly detect these kind of people. The biggest issue, though, is that the IPS doesn't stop this. It will never stop this on Fortinet. So you have to upgrade your Fortinet if you don't want to be vulnerable to this. There's literally no way to stop them from connecting to your VPN otherwise. It's definitely one of those that we consider one of the highest priority of upgrading. And it's a great example of you must upgrade. You must have a patching process for anything that's touching your DMZ, anything that's going on the internet, because if you don't have it, it will go bad. And usually the way that we would also, just to kind of give you some additional defense in depth details, what we would then look for is once they got that foothold, they're going to have to scan and look. So what we usually then would have to do is we would look for a pattern of behavior where a single IP, wherever they land, is looking over lateral ports. And usually it's like, if they connect to over 20 ports on a lateral, or 20 IPs that are a lateral port, connected or failed to connect in a way that looks potentially threatening. So let's say 20 connections over 10 minutes, let's say. And you can get really granular, especially if you collect like Windows firewall logs, Windows host logs, sysmon logs, firewall logs, switch logs, your detailed Fortinet logs. If you have that level of logging, kind of what y'all were talking about, it allows you to get this really defined not defense in depth, but layer defense.
You've already said it twice. You're getting sued now.
Yeah, we're all getting sued.
They're going to have to come find me. It's fine.
Challenge accepted.
That's a really good explanation. And thanks for the free advice there.
Of course.
Upgrade,
yeah.
we all know that already, but that's
Upgrade.
Upgrade your exchange as well. If you
patching. We should drink. Every time we say patch, we should drink.
That's true, yes.
Well, there are 992,000 whatever listings for upgrade. All right, one of my favorite documentaries ever. So we are at 45 minutes. We're getting there. So we can, I mean, that normally when we have our guest programs, we end at about 45 minutes, or we can go a few more minutes and talk about vSphere hole. Depends on how much longer you want to go.
I'd like to cover vSphere because there's just like Matt gave the warning that you should patch that. this vSphere, you probably want to patch that right now as well, because it is one of those things. It's an attack that can originate from your network. There's no interaction from a user necessary. It's a 9.8 RCE remote command execution. So you should be patching that now. Additionally, that vSphere or the vCenter portal should not be sitting on your main network. So there should be, again, layered defense in place where you have the maintenance, the management portals sitting on like a dedicated management VLAN for this.
Yeah, and it's the HTML5 client, right? It's the vSphere HTML5 client.
You got
it. And the latest versions of 6.7 and 7, and they all are HTML5 clients now. They got rid of the Flash, and I think that's where a lot of these problems came from. They had a hard time going from Flash to HTML5. So,
yeah, and this kind of goes back to the first thing we talked about, that development will always fail. Realistically, there will always be bugs and there will always be issues. And especially when you add new features like their new HTML client, I imagine we'll keep seeing stuff like this. It is always wild to me in my past life when I did more pen testing, when people would put their vSphere management layers either on the internet, because I mean you can go to Census and type in vSphere, you'll find 20,000 plus right now, or not in a management segment. It is just sitting out there available to do whatever you want with. And at the very least, like you got to at least put good passwords on it, but it's so rare to find an updated vSphere instance. Like people just don't update them regularly. It's really important to do that, if only because for those of you who've never tried, the logs that come out of vSphere and EXSI are crap. They are not great logs. They're not very explanatory. You could probably dig this exploit out, and really what we look for is patterns because it's easier realistically. But if you can, and what you should do for all your vSphere is always keep it updated, segment as deep as possible, and just push forward as you can.
And quite honestly, this is vCenter. It is really easy to update, right? You connect the ISO file to it. You tell it to update, and you lose control over the vCenter, but the ESXi, the actual virtualization hardware, the processors stay running. So it's just the vCenter that you're updating.
Yeah.
What were you in your past life, Matt?
What was I in my past life? A variety of things. Generally a developer, a red teamer. I started a few startups in the late 2000s around encrypted file sharing. And so I tend to move between red teaming, writing code, and blue teaming in my life, as well as compliance officer sometimes as well, which is always fun.
Okay, the first three are awesome. The compliance officer,
it's my least favorite of all of them.
Yeah, I bet.
In my past life, my most recent past life, I was a ninja unicorn.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. I can see that.
In a little bit of ways, I am still a ninja unicorn, but
sure.
that the whole ninja aspect has moved into sumo wrestler. But
sure,
they're
very much. I mean, they're well respected.
COVID 150. Although I was fat before too. So all right. I think unless we got any closing remarks, that's going to do it for today's episodes, guys. Matt Warner from Blumira, thanks for joining us. Thanks for you dropped the mic like 2 or 3 times, and it was acknowledged on chat too. So so thank you very much. Pascal, thanks for joining us again, and I'm glad to see you got your camera working. And we'll be here again next week. I can't say the same thing, channel same. I don't want to get sued by another company, so I can't say the same what channel, same what time. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll see you next time. Thanks everybody for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.